Left to freeze in snow, the Alpha King found his Omega among the dead. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The snowstorm raged on, a relentless fury of wind and ice tearing through the dense forest. The cold was merciless, biting through every layer of clothing, numbing every inch of exposed skin. Eliza Stone lay motionless, her fragile body half buried in the snow. Her breath came in shallow, strained gasps as her eyes fluttered open, only to find nothing but the white abyss around her. The last thing she remembered was being chased, running desperately through the woods, but now she had been left to freeze, abandoned by those who should have protected her. She felt her strength ebbing away, her body growing colder with every passing minute. The bitter winds howled, carrying with them the scent of pine and decay, the forest eerily silent except for the sound of her own ragged breaths. Her body trembled uncontrollably, but no one came to her aid. She was alone. The snow continued to fall, blanketing her in a veil of white, hiding her from the world. Then, in the distance, she heard something. A sound that made her heart race, though she couldn't quite place it. Footsteps. They grew louder, closer, and then a shadow loomed over her. A figure, strong and commanding, towering above her broken form. She could barely lift her head, but her eyes met the figure's. His eyes. Silver, like the moonlight that pierced through the storm, burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Eliza's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding. She tried to speak, to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper, lost in the howling wind. The figure bent down, his gloved hands carefully lifting her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. His warmth was a stark contrast to the freezing cold, and for a moment, Eliza thought she might finally be able to rest, to close her eyes and let go. But no. She couldn't. She wasn't ready. Not yet. The Alpha King stared down at her with an expression that was unreadable, his jaw clenched in determination. He wasn't sure why he was drawn to her, why he felt compelled to save this weak, broken Omega. But something inside him, something deep, something primal, told him that she was important. That she was meant to be his. As he carried her through the snow, the storm began to subside, the winds calming as if acknowledging his presence. The forest seemed to part before him, guiding his path. It was as though the world itself was shifting, making way for this moment, this encounter. Eliza's vision blurred, her consciousness slipping in and out of focus, but she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek. She wasn't sure who this man was, or why he had come to her, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. The Alpha King didn't speak. He didn't need to. His actions, his silent promise to protect her, spoke louder than any words ever could. And as they made their way through the snow, Eliza felt a strange warmth blossom in her chest, a feeling she couldn't explain. A feeling she hadn't known she was capable of feeling anymore. A feeling of hope. As the Alpha King made his way through the snow-covered forest, carrying Eliza Stone in his strong arms, the storm began to quiet, and a strange calm settled over the land. His footsteps were steady, sure, each step taking him closer to the warmth and safety of his castle. The harsh winds that had raged so fiercely moments ago now seemed to bend to his will, parting as he moved, almost as if the world itself was yielding to his presence. Eliza, barely conscious, could feel the warmth of his body seeping into hers, the heat from his chest spreading through her, offering comfort where there had been nothing but the biting cold. Her mind swirled in a haze of confusion and exhaustion, but even through the fog, she could sense the protective aura around him, an energy so powerful that it made her feel small, yet oddly safe. She had been abandoned, left to freeze, but now, in the arms of this stranger, there was something different. Something inexplicable. Her head rested against his broad shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax, even if only for a moment. The Alpha King's sharp gaze never wavered as he moved swiftly through the snow, his senses alert to every sound in the surrounding forest. He was used to the cold, to the harsh elements of the land he ruled, but there was something different about Eliza, something that drew him in, a magnetism he could not explain. As he carried her through the forest, he thought about the fateful moment when he had found her, lying in the snow, barely clinging to life. Her fragile body, the bruises and injuries, the clear signs of abandonment, it stirred something deep inside him. A sense of duty, perhaps, or something more, something ancient and primal. He had no answers, but he felt a bond forming, one that he couldn't ignore, no matter how much he tried to push it aside. The long trek through the snow was slow, but with each passing minute, the castle came closer into view, its stone walls rising against the horizon. The gates were guarded, but the Alpha King's presence was all that was needed for them to open wide, allowing him and Eliza to pass. Inside the castle, the warmth hit them like a wave, a stark contrast to the freezing temperatures outside. The servants, who had been waiting for their king's return, quickly rushed to assist, taking Eliza from his arms and guiding her to a nearby bed, where they began to tend to her wounds. The Alpha King stood at the foot of the bed, his gaze never leaving her, as the healers worked quickly, removing the layers of snow-covered clothing and cleaning the dirt and blood from her skin. His thoughts were clouded, his emotions a tangled mess he couldn't make sense of. Eliza, the girl he had found in the snow, the girl he had rescued from certain death, she was important. He didn't know why, but he could feel it in his bones, in the very core of his being. As the healers finished, they stepped back, allowing the Alpha King to approach. He knelt beside the bed, his powerful hands reaching out to gently touch her forehead. Eliza's skin was cold, pale, but she was breathing, and that was all that mattered for now. The bond between them, though unspoken, was undeniable. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of the blankets and the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The Alpha King remained by her side, his heart beating with an intensity he couldn't understand. He had rescued her, yes, but there was something more to this, something that went beyond just saving her life. This was fate, he realized, and for better or worse, their paths had crossed in this moment. And now, he would do whatever it took to protect her. As the hours passed, Eliza Stone slowly began to regain consciousness. The warmth from the fire and the softness of the bed beneath her were a welcome contrast to the icy grip of the storm she had left behind. She blinked her eyes open, the light from the candles flickering gently in the room. Her head was heavy, her body sore, but she could feel the tenderness of the blankets wrapped around her. She tried to sit up but immediately felt a wave of dizziness and exhaustion wash over her. "Easy, now," a calm voice said. It was deep and soothing, yet commanding in a way that made her pause. The Alpha King was standing at the edge of the room, watching her with a watchful, steady gaze. His presence seemed to fill the space, yet there was no pressure, only a quiet strength that made her feel both safe and vulnerable at the same time. "You're safe here," he said, his tone soft yet firm, as if to assure her that there was no need to fear. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, unsure of who he was. The memory of the storm, of being left in the cold, of the last moments of her life before everything went dark, were still vivid in her mind. She couldn't remember how she had gotten here, but she could feel that this man, this stranger, was responsible for her being alive. He had saved her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. He smiled faintly, though there was a depth to it that suggested he knew more than he was willing to share. "I am the Alpha King, Alexander Knight," he replied. His words were calm, almost too calm, but there was something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten. He wasn't just any king, he was a ruler, a man with power beyond what she could imagine. "And you are my guest," he continued. "You've been through a lot, and you need rest. Take your time." Eliza blinked, trying to process what he was saying. The Alpha King? She had heard of rulers like him, distant and unreachable, legends in their own right. But here, in this room, he was real, standing before her. She tried to remember why she had been left out in the snow, why she had been abandoned by her pack, but the memories were a blur, scattered and distant. A sudden wave of sorrow and confusion washed over her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the sheets, feeling the weight of everything she had lost. Why did you save me?" she asked softly. Alexander stepped closer, his expression unreadable but with a hint of something that felt almost like compassion. "Because it was meant to be," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You're not just anyone, Eliza. there's more to you than meets the eye. And I believe we are connected in ways you don't yet understand." Eliza stared at him, still confused but also intrigued. He wasn't just a man of power, there was something deeper in his words, something she couldn't quite place. A sense of destiny, perhaps. She wasn't sure, but something in his gaze made her feel like this was only the beginning. As she lay back down, her mind still racing with questions, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. That the Alpha King had saved her for a reason that would unfold in time, whether she was ready for it or not. And despite the uncertainty that lingered in the air, she couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in a long while, she was exactly where she needed to be. As the days passed, Eliza Stone slowly adjusted to her new reality. The Alpha King, Alexander Knight, had kept his distance, but there was a quiet, undeniable connection between them that neither of them could ignore. Each time she woke, she found herself in the same soft, warm bed, the flickering fire in the hearth casting shadows across the room. The castle, with its towering stone walls and vast corridors, had become a strange sanctuary for her. Though she still couldn't remember how she had ended up in the snow, abandoned by her pack, she knew one thing for certain: she was safe now, in the Alpha King's care. He had offered her nothing but kindness, and yet, there was an air of mystery around him that made her wonder if he was hiding something. Why had he saved her? What was it that made her so important? It had been 2 weeks since the storm, and Eliza had spent most of her time recovering. Her body, still sore from the freezing cold and the injuries she had suffered, was healing. But her mind remained restless, tangled with the questions she could not answer. The Alpha King had told her that there was more to her than met the eye, but she didn't understand. What did he mean? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light across the landscape, Eliza wandered the castle's gardens. The air was crisp, the scent of pine and earth filling her lungs. She had always loved the quiet solitude of nature, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. As she walked, she noticed a figure standing near the edge of the garden, his back to her. It was the Alpha King. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should approach him. But something in her chest tugged at her, urging her to move forward. She did. "Your Majesty," she called softly. Alexander turned slowly, his silver eyes meeting hers. There was something in his gaze, something unreadable. "Eliza," he greeted her, his voice low and steady. "I did not expect to see you out here. Are you feeling better?" Eliza nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. Her body had healed, but her heart and mind were still searching for answers. "I'm better," she replied quietly. "But I still don't understand. Why did you save me?" Alexander's expression softened, though he didn't answer immediately. He took a step closer, his presence imposing yet calming. "There are things about you, Eliza, that you don't yet understand. Things about your past, your future. You were never meant to be abandoned, not like that. I could feel it the moment I saw you in the snow." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She had heard him speak like this before, but it was different now. The words carried weight, and the way he spoke, so certain, so sure, it made her question everything she thought she knew. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander took another step forward, the air around them seeming to grow heavier. "You were meant to find me," he said softly. "And I was meant to find you." His words hung in the air, leaving Eliza speechless. She wanted to argue, to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she stood there, frozen by the intensity of the moment. "What are you saying?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. Alexander's eyes never left hers as he spoke, each word laden with a deeper meaning. "You are my fated mate, Eliza," he said quietly. "And there is nothing that will keep us apart." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Fated mate? The words echoed in her mind, but she couldn't make sense of them. "But I don't remember," she trailed off, unsure of what to say next. Alexander reached out, gently lifting her chin so she could look into his eyes. "You will, in time," he said softly. "Everything will make sense soon." Eliza didn't know what to say. She felt as though her entire world had been turned upside down. She had been abandoned, left for dead, and now this man, this powerful, mysterious Alpha King, was telling her that she was his fated mate. How could that be true? How could it be real? But as she stood there, looking into his silver eyes, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It was undeniable, a force greater than anything she had ever known. The storm that had once raged outside seemed to settle in her heart, and for the first time since she had been abandoned, she felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. She was no longer lost. She had a place here, with him. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and discovery for Eliza. The Alpha King, Alexander Knight, remained a steady, silent presence at her side, his every action, his every glance, conveying a sense of security she had never known before. Despite the strange and overwhelming circumstances, she found herself growing accustomed to the quiet rhythm of the castle, its stone walls now feeling like a refuge rather than a prison. Every day, the Alpha King would visit her, never pushing her, always patient, always kind. He spoke little of the bond between them, but his actions spoke volumes. Eliza began to feel an undeniable pull towards him, an attraction that went beyond mere physicality. It was as if their souls were already intertwined, though neither of them fully understood what that meant. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Eliza found herself watching him more closely than she ever had before. The flickering flames cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the intensity in his silver eyes. There was power in him, an ancient strength that she couldn't comprehend. Yet, beneath that power, there was a tenderness that surprised her. He was not just a king, a ruler of an entire realm. He was something more, something that called to her. "Why me?" Eliza finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. Eliza swallowed, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. "I don't understand. Why did you save me? Why did you bring me here?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. He simply stared at her, as if searching for the right words. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I saved you because you are important to me," he said simply. "I may not know why yet, but I know you are. The bond between us is not something that can be explained in words. It's something deeper, something ancient." Eliza's heart raced at his words. She felt it too, the connection between them, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to embrace it. "But I don't remember anything," she said quietly. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I've lost everything." Alexander's expression softened, and he reached across the table, taking her hand gently in his. "You haven't lost everything," he said. "You found something far more valuable than anything you could have lost. You found me, and I've found you." His words, though simple, were a balm to her wounded heart. For the first time since she had awoken in his care, Eliza felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't alone anymore. As the fire crackled between them, Eliza's thoughts turned inward. She had been abandoned, cast aside by those who should have loved her, but here, in the Alpha King's presence, she was something more. She was a part of something greater than herself, something she didn't fully understand, but something she could no longer deny. "I don't know what this is, Alexander," she said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But I want to understand. I want to know what this bond means." Alexander smiled, a small, reassuring smile. "In time, Eliza. In time, you will understand. But for now, all you need to know is that you are safe. And you are with me." Eliza's heart swelled with emotion, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps she could have a future. A future with him. The Alpha King. The man who had saved her and who, she now realized, had become something more than just a king to her. He had become her protector, her guide, and possibly, her mate. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza's life at the castle grew more settled. The Alpha King, Alexander Knight, had made it clear that she was under his protection, but their bond, whatever it was, remained an unspoken understanding between them. She still didn't fully understand the nature of their connection, but with each passing day, she felt the invisible thread between them growing stronger. Alexander was always there, silently watching over her, his presence never demanding, but always reassuring. There were times when Eliza would catch him staring at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of longing and something else she couldn't quite place. His gaze held a depth, an ancient power, that both intrigued and intimidated her. She had never been the type to lean on others, but with him, she found herself doing just that. It wasn't weakness, it was something deeper, something more profound. He was not just the Alpha King to her now, he had become someone she could trust, someone who had saved her and promised to protect her. One evening, as the sun set behind the castle, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Eliza sat in the garden, her thoughts swirling. The air was cool, the scent of blooming flowers mixing with the fresh evening breeze. It was a peaceful evening, and yet, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would change everything. She had spent enough time with Alexander to know that he was not a man to speak lightly, and when he said that she was important, that their bond was inevitable, she could feel the truth in his words. But what did it mean? Why her? She had been abandoned by her pack, left to freeze in the snow. What did she have to offer the powerful Alpha King? As she sat lost in thought, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Alexander walking toward her, his tall, commanding figure illuminated by the fading light of the day. There was something different in his stride, a sense of urgency in his movements. "Eliza," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of seriousness that caught her attention. "There's something we need to talk about." Eliza stood up, her heart racing as she walked toward him. "What is it?" she asked, her voice betraying the uncertainty that had been building inside her. Alexander stopped a few feet away from her, his silver eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "I have been avoiding this conversation," he said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. "But it is time you understand the truth. The truth about who you are, and why I brought you here." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this moment, feared that the Alpha King would reveal something that would shatter the fragile peace she had found in his presence. "What truth?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander took a deep breath, his gaze softening just a little. "You are not just an ordinary Omega, Eliza," he said, his words heavy with meaning. "You are of royal blood, a bloodline that was hidden away, protected for centuries. Your true heritage has been concealed, but now, it's time for you to know." Eliza stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. Royal blood? Hidden heritage? She had never known anything of the sort. "I don't understand," she murmured, shaking her head. "What do you mean?" "I've never been part of any royal family." Alexander stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, yet comforting. "You have been kept hidden for your own protection," he said, his voice softening. "There are forces in this world that would stop at nothing to use your bloodline for their own gain. That's why I saved you. Not just because of the bond we share, but because you are more important than you realize. You have a destiny, Eliza. A destiny that has been waiting for you for a long time." Eliza's mind raced, her thoughts tangled in confusion. She had never known any of this, never even imagined that she could be a part of something so much larger than herself. But as Alexander stood before her, his gaze filled with such certainty, she couldn't help but feel that perhaps he was telling the truth. Perhaps this bond between them was not just a coincidence. "What does this mean for me?" she asked, her voice trembling with the weight of his words. Alexander's expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, Eliza saw a glimmer of warmth in his eyes. "It means that you are not alone, Eliza," he said gently. "You have a place here, with me. And together, we will face whatever comes next. I will stand by you, as I always have." Eliza's heart swelled with emotion, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that perhaps she was where she was meant to be. With him. The Alpha King. The following days were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Eliza had learned more about the world she was now part of, the world that had always been just out of reach. Alexander's words lingered in her mind. She was of royal blood, a legacy that had been hidden for her protection. It was hard to fully grasp, but one thing was clear, her life had changed in ways she could not yet understand. The connection between her and Alexander had deepened in ways she never imagined. The bond they shared was undeniable. She could feel it now, a steady pull between them, something that wasn't just emotional but felt almost physical. He was there when she woke, his presence a constant comfort. And though their conversations had remained mostly light, there was always an underlying current of unspoken understanding. It was as if he was waiting for her to be ready to learn everything he had to offer. One morning, as the castle's bells tolled, Eliza walked through the corridors, her feet light against the stone floor. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow through the tall windows. She had found herself in a quiet wing of the castle she had never explored before. As she wandered through the halls, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her. She was drawn to a large set of doors, intricately carved with designs of wolves, moons, and stars. Without thinking, she pushed them open, stepping into a grand room. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries, each telling a story of battles, kings, and queens long gone. In the center of the room, a large table stood, covered in maps and documents. At the far end, Alexander was seated, his head bent over a piece of parchment. He didn't hear her enter, and for a moment, Eliza simply watched him. His silver eyes were focused, his brow furrowed as he studied something intently. She didn't want to disturb him, but she found herself walking toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached his side, he looked up, his expression softening as soon as he saw her. "Eliza," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "I didn't hear you come in." "I'm sorry," she replied, unsure of what to say. "I didn't mean to intrude." Alexander shook his head, smiling slightly. "You're never an intrusion. You are always welcome here." Eliza's heart fluttered at his words. She had never been made to feel like this, valued, important. But there was still so much she didn't understand. "What is this room?" she asked, looking around at the maps and documents. "This is the war room," Alexander explained, standing up and walking over to the large table. "It's where we make decisions about the future of the kingdom, where strategies are planned. It's also where I keep records of the old bloodlines, the ones that were hidden away long ago. Your bloodline is here, Eliza." She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the table. There, in front of her, were scrolls and books, some old, some new, all documenting the history of her family. "But why? Why did they hide us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's expression darkened for a moment, a flicker of something ancient and sorrowful crossing his features. "Because your bloodline was powerful, too powerful for some to allow it to remain known. There are those who would have used it for their own gain, those who would have sought to control you, Eliza. That's why it was hidden. And that's why I had to find you." Eliza absorbed his words, her mind racing. She had always felt different, like there was more to her story than she knew. But to hear him confirm it, to hear him say that her bloodline was powerful and dangerous, it was almost too much to take in. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. Alexander walked over to her, his presence commanding but not overbearing. "Now, we figure out what your legacy means," he said softly. "Together." Eliza felt the weight of his words, but also the warmth of his hand as he placed it gently on hers. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and despite the uncertainty of the future, she felt as though she wasn't alone. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was where she belonged. "We'll face it together," she said, her voice steady. Alexander smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "Yes, we will." The weeks passed, and Eliza found herself adapting to her new life at the castle. The weight of her royal heritage, the legacy she had never known, was still settling in her mind. Alexander, the Alpha King, was always by her side, offering guidance without overwhelming her. He was patient with her, understanding the confusion she felt, and each day, she learned more about herself, her bloodline, and the world she now belonged to. One morning, as the sun rose and bathed the castle in its warm golden light, Eliza stood at the balcony, looking out over the vast expanse of the kingdom. The landscape stretched for miles, the rolling hills and dense forests reminding her of the world beyond the castle walls. She had been raised in a small village, never imagining a life like this. Now, she was here, part of something far greater than she could have ever dreamed. But with that came questions. Questions about her past, her future, and the role she would play in the kingdom's fate. Eliza. The sound of Alexander's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his silver eyes locking with hers. He wore his usual commanding presence, but there was a softness in his gaze that made her heart race. "Good morning," she said, offering him a small smile. He stepped toward her, his expression serious. "There is something we must discuss." Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She had learned to trust him, but there was always a sense of urgency in his voice when he needed to share something important. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady. Alexander's gaze softened, but there was an intensity behind his eyes. "There are forces in the kingdom that wish to control the power of your bloodline," he said, his voice low. "They know who you are, Eliza. And they will stop at nothing to use you for their own purposes." Eliza's heart tightened in her chest. She had feared this moment. She had known, deep down, that the hidden legacy of her bloodline would not go unnoticed. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "We face it, together," he said, his voice firm yet reassuring. "We will protect you, Eliza. I will protect you." Eliza looked up at him, her mind racing. The idea of being used, manipulated for something she had no control over, filled her with a mixture of fear and determination. But in that moment, standing beside Alexander, she knew she wasn't alone. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice filled with a newfound strength. Alexander's eyes softened as he nodded. "Good. We will begin preparing for what comes next." The next few days were filled with strategy and planning. Alexander had gathered his most trusted advisors, and they worked tirelessly to ensure Eliza's safety. The Alpha King had powerful allies, but there were also enemies in the shadows, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. As the days grew longer, Eliza found herself learning more about the world of politics, power, and the dangers that came with it. She had never been a part of this world, but now, she was at its heart. She began to understand the gravity of the situation, the weight of the legacy she had inherited. Her bloodline was not just a symbol of power, it was a weapon. And there were those who would use it for their own gain. One evening, as they sat in the war room, discussing their next move, Eliza turned to Alexander. "How do we stop them?" she asked, her voice steady. "How do we stop the ones who want to control me?" Alexander met her gaze, his expression serious. "We don't stop them by hiding, Eliza," he said firmly. "We face them head-on. We show them that we will not be controlled, that we are stronger than they think." Eliza felt a surge of strength within her. She was no longer the scared, abandoned girl she had been when she first arrived at the castle. She had a purpose now, a destiny she was ready to embrace. She would stand beside Alexander, not as a passive bystander, but as an equal. "Together," she whispered, her eyes never leaving his. Alexander smiled, a rare and genuine smile. "Together." The days that followed were filled with a quiet, determined preparation. Eliza could feel the weight of the task ahead, but she no longer feared it. As the Alpha King's fated mate, she now understood her place in the world, and the legacy that was hers to protect. Alexander had been steadfast in his commitment to her, offering his wisdom and guidance as they prepared for the impending threat. The kingdom was in a delicate balance, and they both knew that it would take more than strength to survive the challenges ahead. It was now more than ever about unity. One evening, as Eliza sat by the fire in her chamber, going over the strategies Alexander had outlined, she heard a soft knock on her door. She stood up, her heart racing slightly, unsure of who it could be. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and Alexander stepped inside, his silver eyes locking with hers. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her feel as if he could see right through her, understanding her thoughts and fears before she even spoke them. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. Eliza offered him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes completely. "I'm adjusting," she replied honestly. "But there's so much to learn, so much I still don't understand." Alexander walked toward her, standing beside her as he looked down at the documents spread across the table. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers against hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a surge of warmth through her. "You don't have to understand everything right now," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "We'll face it together, step by step." Eliza nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never imagined that she would find herself in such a position, standing beside a man as powerful and enigmatic as Alexander. Yet, in this moment, she realized that the bond between them was not just about destiny, it was about trust, love, and the shared strength they would need to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady as she looked up at him. "Next," Alexander said, his tone filled with resolve, "we gather our allies and prepare to confront the forces that threaten this kingdom. You have a part to play in all of this, Eliza. A very important part." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. "Me?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "But I don't know how you will," he interrupted gently, placing his hand on her shoulder in reassurance. "Your strength doesn't come from what you know, but from what you are. Your bloodline, your heritage, it's powerful, Eliza. And now, it's time for you to embrace it. You are not just my mate, you are the future of this kingdom." Eliza's mind raced with the weight of his words. She had always believed that power was something to be feared, something that came with great responsibility. But now, standing here with Alexander, she began to understand that power could also be a source of hope. They were not facing this battle alone. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice filled with a determination she hadn't known she possessed. Alexander smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up his face. "I knew you would be," he said, his eyes filled with pride. "Together, we will ensure that this kingdom remains strong, and that our people are protected. Nothing can stand against us." Eliza stood straighter, her heart swelling with newfound confidence. She wasn't just a girl who had been left to die in the snow. She was the Alpha King's mate, and the protector of a legacy that was hers to guide. The path ahead would not be easy, but with Alexander by her side, she knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. They were not just a king and his mate. They were a force, united in purpose and in heart, ready to face the future together.